Welcome back to Vietnamese Vixens. Today's story comes from a place a lot of you might recognize that moment when you realize all your planning, all your research, all your careful preparation meant absolutely nothing. This is about a man who thought he had every angle covered, who spent years getting ready for Vietnam, who looked at other expats and thought he'd never make their mistakes. But preparation doesn't protect you from yourself. It doesn't protect you from the one thing you can't plan for your own blind spots, your own need to feel special, your own arrogance wrapped up as confidence. This is Lars's story. He's 34, from Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and he learned the hardest way possible that sometimes the smartest people make the dumbest decisions because they can't imagine being the fool. If you've ever felt overconfident about something, if you've ever thought you had it all figured out, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Share your own stories if you've been humbled by life. We read every single one. Now, let me hand this over to Lars. I landed in Ho Chi Minh City on a Tuesday afternoon in March, and the heat hit me like walking into a wall. I'd read about it, watched videos, prepared myself mentally, but nothing actually prepares you for that first breath of Vietnamese air when you step out of Tan Son Nhut Airport. It's thick, humid, smells like exhaust and street food and something floral I couldn't identify. I stood there on the curb with my two suitcases, my backpack full of important documents and plastic sleeves, and I felt this rush of accomplishment. 2 years of planning, 2 years of Vietnamese lessons on Duolingo and Italki, spreadsheets tracking cost of living in different districts, Reddit threads memorized, expat blogs analyzed. I wasn't like those other guys who just show up with a backpack and a dream. I had researched. I had prepared. I knew exactly which district I wanted to live in, which co-working spaces had the best Wi-Fi, which coffee shops were expat traps versus local gems. I had this. The Grab driver loaded my suitcases, and we merged into traffic, and I watched the organized chaos of motorbikes swarming around us. And I thought, yeah, I can do this. I'd watched enough dashcam videos to understand the flow. It looks insane, but there's a rhythm to it. See, I told myself, you understand this already. You're not scared. You're observing. You're adapting. That's what I was good at. Systems, patterns, logical analysis. That's what made me successful back in Rotterdam, working in software engineering, building solutions for logistics companies. Vietnam was just another system to decode. My apartment was in Binh Thanh, deliberately not in District 1 where all the new expats clustered together in their bubble. I'd chosen a local neighborhood, still close enough to the center, but real, you know? The kind of place where I'd be forced to actually integrate instead of just hanging out at expat bars complaining about the traffic. The building was newer, had decent Wi-Fi, and my 11th floor unit had a balcony overlooking the street. I spent that first evening unpacking methodically, setting up my workspace, testing the internet speed, organizing my important documents, everything according to plan. Below me, the street was alive with vendors and motorbikes, and the sounds of Vietnamese that I could almost understand if I concentrated. I felt this deep satisfaction. Like I'd made it. Like I was already ahead of everyone who just stumbles into this country with no preparation. Those first few weeks were everything I'd hoped for. I'd wake up early, before the heat got unbearable, and walk to a local coffee shop where I'd practice ordering in Vietnamese. The owner, a woman in her 50s who thought my accent was hilarious, would correct my tones and I'd repeat them until she nodded approval. I felt proud of these small victories. See, this is how you do it. You engage. You learn. You respect the culture. Not like those expats I'd already started seeing at the co-working space in District 1. Americans mostly, some Australians, all of them complaining about the food, about the language, about how nothing works the way it does back home. I'd sit there with my Vietnamese coffee, working on my laptop, and internally judge every complaint I overheard. Why did you even come here if you're just going to complain? You didn't prepare. You didn't study. You're expecting Vietnam to adjust to you instead of the other way around. I made friends with a few locals through language exchange meetups. Practiced my Dutch with a Vietnamese guy learning it for his girlfriend in Amsterdam. Helped a local startup with some coding issues, and they invited me to their team dinners. I was doing it right, I thought. Building genuine connections, not transactional relationships. Not chasing girls like those English teachers I'd see at the bars in Bui Vien, drunk and loud and embarrassing. I was here to build something real. That's when I met Duke at a coffee shop in District 3. I'd been working there for a few hours when he sat down at the next table, and we got talking. He spoke perfect English, worked in export logistics, and when I mentioned my background in software for logistics companies, his eyes lit up. We talked for 2 hours about supply chain optimization, about the opportunities in Vietnam's growing economy, about the gaps in the market that someone with the right knowledge could fill. He was sharp, asked good questions, seemed genuinely interested in my perspective. By the end of that conversation, he'd invited me to tour his company's warehouse the following week. I should have been more cautious. I know that now. But here's the thing: I'd researched this exact industry before moving. I knew Vietnam was a manufacturing hub, knew the export business was booming, knew there were real opportunities for people who understood both the technical side and the international market. This wasn't some random bar conversation. This was my preparation paying off. This was my expertise being recognized. Duck wasn't trying to sell me anything. He was just networking, the way professionals do everywhere in the world. The warehouse tour happened on a humid Thursday morning. It was legitimate. A real facility in District 9, workers packaging goods, forklifts moving pallets, the organized chaos of a functioning logistics operation. Doc introduced me to his partners, two other Vietnamese businessmen in their 40s who dressed sharp and spoke English with British accents. They showed me their client list, their export numbers, explained the bottlenecks they were facing with their current software systems. They weren't asking for anything. They were just being hospitable, showing interest in my background, picking my brain about solutions. Over the next few weeks, Duck and I became friends. We'd meet for coffee, talk about business, about Vietnam, about life. He introduced me to more people in his network. Dinners at nice restaurants, conversations about the economy, about opportunities. I felt like I was being welcomed into something real, something beyond the superficial expat experience. These weren't people trying to scam tourists. These were educated businessmen with real operations and real problems that my expertise could help solve. When they first mentioned partnership, it was casual. We were having dinner, a few beers in, and one of the partners said something like, "You know, Lars, we could really use someone with your technical knowledge. Have you ever thought about consulting, or maybe even partnering on the tech side?" I played it cool, said I'd think about it, but inside I was excited. This was exactly why I'd moved to Vietnam, not to be another expat living off savings and teaching English, but to build something meaningful, to leverage my skills in a growing market. I spent a week analyzing it, made spreadsheets, researched Vietnamese business law, read through forums about foreign investment. Everything checked out. The business was real, registered, had actual revenue. The partnership they were proposing was technical consulting with equity. Minimal capital investment required initially, just my expertise in building better systems. It made sense. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that comes from doing things the right way, from networking professionally, from having actual skills to offer, from not being just another tourist. The contract looked legitimate. I had it reviewed by a lawyer recommended through an expat business forum. Expensive but thorough. He pointed out a few clauses that needed clarification, which we negotiated. The whole process felt professional, adult, nothing like the sketchy bar deals I'd heard horror stories about. When I signed, I felt validated. Like all my preparation, all my careful planning, all my methodical approach was being rewarded. I wasn't falling for some obvious scam. I was making a calculated investment in a legitimate business where my expertise added real value. The first few months were exactly what they'd promised. I built out new inventory management systems, optimized their shipping logistics, integrated better tracking. The business ran smoother. Profits increased. I saw the numbers. My equity stake started generating actual returns. Not huge, but real money that showed up in my account monthly. I'd go to the warehouse, see my systems working, see the efficiency improvements, feel that deep satisfaction of building something that matters. My social circle expanded naturally. Duck and his partners included me in more dinners, more events. I met their families. Got invited to a wedding. Started feeling less like a foreigner and more like someone who actually belonged in this city. Other expats at the co-working space would complain about feeling isolated, about the difficulty of making real Vietnamese friends. And I'd nod sympathetically while thinking, maybe you're just not offering anything of value. Maybe you're just here to take, not to contribute. I was at one of these dinners, celebrating someone's birthday at a rooftop restaurant in District 1, when I first really noticed Lynn. She'd been around before I'd seen her at a few events, always peripheral, always professional. She worked for a company that did business with Duck's operation, something in quality control or compliance. I never got the exact details. But that night, she was seated across from me, and we ended up talking for hours about everything except business. She'd studied in Singapore, spoke 3 languages, had opinions about art and architecture, and the gentrification of Ho Chi Minh City that were sharp and informed and sometimes contradicted my own assumptions. I liked that. I liked that she didn't just agree with everything I said. I liked that she made me think. After that dinner, she started appearing more often. Always in group settings, always professional, but we'd find ourselves in conversation. About books, about the differences between Dutch and Vietnamese culture, about what it meant to belong somewhere. She never asked about money, never seemed impressed by the fact that I was a foreign business owner. If anything, she seemed skeptical of expats in general, which made me want to prove I was different. It was probably 3 months of this before anything shifted. We were at another dinner, smaller group this time, and afterwards she asked if I wanted to walk, instead of grabbing a grab. It was late, the streets were quieter, and we walked through District 1 talking about nothing important and everything important. She told me about her family, about the pressure to marry someone suitable, about feeling caught between traditional expectations and her own ambitions. I told her about growing up in Rotterdam, about feeling like I never quite fit in the corporate culture back home, about wanting to build something that felt more meaningful than just another paycheck. When we finally got a grab, she went to her apartment and I went to mine, but something had changed. This wasn't networking. This wasn't transactional. This was something else, something I hadn't planned for, something my spreadsheets hadn't accounted for. And for the first time since arriving in Vietnam, I felt uncertain. Not about business, not about my plans, but about what I wanted. About whether I was still just passing through or if I was actually building a life here. I told myself to be careful. I'd heard the stories, read the warnings, knew the stereotypes. But Lynn didn't fit any pattern I'd been warned about. She was educated, financially independent, skeptical of relationships with foreigners. If anything, I felt like I was the one pursuing her, not the other way around. And that felt right. That felt real. That felt like proof that I was doing everything differently. That my approach was working. That I wasn't just another expat making predictable mistakes. I had no idea that everything I thought I understood was already wrong. That my preparation had made me more vulnerable, not less. That my confidence in my own analytical abilities had created the perfect blind spot. But I wouldn't understand that for months. Right then, walking home that night, I felt like I'd finally figured out how to actually live in Vietnam, not just survive as an expat. I felt like I'd won something that other people lost. I had no idea what was coming. The business partnership evolved exactly the way I'd projected. By month 4, we were handling 3 times the export volume we've started with. My systems were working beautifully, automated inventory tracking, optimized shipping routes, real-time client updates. Duck and his partners were thrilled. They'd bring clients to the warehouse specifically to show off the technology integration, always introducing me as their Dutch partner, the technical brain behind their expansion. I won't lie, it felt good. It felt like validation that I'd made the right choice leaving Rotterdam, that my 2 years of preparation had actually meant something. The returns kept coming, not massive amounts, but consistent, enough that I was living comfortably, reinvesting some back into the business, saving some, and still having plenty for a good life in the city. I'd upgraded my apartment to a nicer place in District 2, closer to the warehouse, with a view of the river. Had a motorbike now too, a Honda Wave that I'd learned to navigate through traffic, with the same analytical approach I applied to everything else. Study the patterns, understand the flow, adapt, and execute. Other expats would white-knuckle their way through intersections, but I'd learned to just go, to trust the system. It felt like a metaphor for my whole experience here. Lynn and I had fallen into something that felt inevitable. After that first walk, we started seeing each other deliberately. Coffee in the mornings before work, dinners that weren't part of group gatherings, long conversations on my balcony while the city hummed below us. She'd stay over sometimes, leave early for her own apartment to get ready for work. It felt adult, respectful, like a real relationship built on mutual interest, not the transactional dynamics I'd seen other expats fall into. What I appreciated most was that she challenged me. When I'd talk about my business success, she'd ask pointed questions about sustainability, about whether I really understood Vietnamese business culture, about the difference between being welcomed and being included. Sometimes her skepticism annoyed me, if I'm honest. I'd think, I've been here almost a year now, I'm not some tourist stumbling around blind. But I also respected that she didn't just validate everything I said. She made me think harder, look deeper, question my assumptions. Her family was traditional. She'd mentioned this early on, explained that introducing a foreign boyfriend would be complicated. Her parents expected her to marry a Vietnamese man from a good family, someone they could vet and approve. I understood. I didn't push. We kept things private, which actually suited me fine. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. This wasn't about showing off a Vietnamese girlfriend like some kind of trophy. This was just about two people who connected, who understood each other, who were building something real. The business expansion opportunities started appearing around month 6. Duck called me to a meeting, more formal than our usual coffee catch-ups. They'd been approached by a manufacturing company in Binh Duong province that wanted to partner on a new export line textiles, high volume, connections to European buyers. The opportunity was significant, but required capital investment to scale up operations, upgrade equipment, hire specialized staff. They'd already secured commitments from the manufacturing side and had European buyers lined up through existing contacts. What they needed was capital and technical expertise to manage the logistics integration. The numbers looked good. I spent a week modeling different scenarios, stress testing assumptions, calculating risk exposure. The ROI projections were conservative but solid. My lawyer reviewed the contracts again, more complicated this time, given the multi-party nature of the deal, but he said everything checked out legally. The investment required was substantial for me, about 40% of what I'd saved over the past year, plus some of my returns from the existing partnership. But the projected returns would triple my equity stake within 18 months. I went back and forth on it. This was a bigger commitment, a deeper integration into Vietnamese business structures. But wasn't that the whole point? I hadn't moved here to play it safe. I'd moved here to build something significant. And I had real evidence now, 6 months of successful partnership, consistent returns, growing trust with people who'd proven themselves legitimate. This wasn't blind faith. This was calculated risk based on demonstrated performance. Lynn was cautious when I told her about it. We were having dinner at a small restaurant near her apartment, and I was excited, talking through the opportunity, the projections, the potential. She listened quietly, then asked, "How well do you really know these people, Lars?" I remember feeling defensive. I explained the 6 months of working together, the legitimate business operations, the legal review, the documented returns. She nodded but didn't look convinced. Vietnamese business culture is different, she said. Relationships can look one way on the surface and be something completely different underneath, especially with foreigners. I asked what she meant, and she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. It's not that they're lying necessarily. It's that there are expectations and understandings that aren't spoken. Things that Vietnamese people would know intuitively, but foreigners miss. And sometimes that gap gets exploited, not maliciously, just practically. I told her I appreciated the concern, but I'd done my research, I understood the risks, I'd taken precautions. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I know you're smart, Lars. I just don't want you to get hurt." I squeezed back and said, "I've got this." I signed the expansion deal in July. The capital transfer went through clean, everything documented properly. The new operation launched within weeks, impressive efficiency that made me feel even better about the decision. I visited the Binh Duong facility, saw the equipment being installed, met the manufacturing partners. Everything tangible, everything real. The European buyers were confirmed. First shipments were scheduled. I was genuinely proud of what we were building. Lynn's demeanor changed slightly after that, though I didn't register it as significant at the time. She seemed more stressed about work, less available for our usual dinners. When we did see each other, she was distracted. I asked if everything was okay, and she said yes, just busy, just family stuff. Her father wasn't well, nothing serious, but it meant more responsibility for her. I offered support, asked if there was anything I could do. She said no, it was fine, just Vietnamese family dynamics that would be hard to explain. Then one evening in August, we were at my apartment, and she started crying. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears while we were sitting on the couch. I held her and waited, and eventually she told me her father needed surgery. Not life-threatening, but expensive, and her family's insurance wouldn't cover all of it. She had savings, but not enough, and her brother, who usually helped, was having his own financial problems. She wasn't asking me for anything, she said. She just needed to tell someone because the stress was crushing her. I offered to help immediately. She refused, said, absolutely not. That wasn't why she told me. I insisted. Said we were together, said her problems were my problems, said I had the money and it didn't make sense for her father to wait on surgery when I could help. She cried harder and said she couldn't accept that. It wasn't right. We hadn't been together that long. I said I didn't care about the timeline. I cared about her family. We went back and forth for an hour. Finally, she agreed to accept it as a loan, would pay me back monthly. I said fine, whatever made her comfortable. But privately, I had no intention of actually accepting repayment. The amount was significant, but not devastating, about $15,000 USD. I transferred it the next day. She was grateful in a way that felt almost painful, like she was ashamed of needing help. I told her to stop, that this was what people did for each other, that I was happy to help. Her father had the surgery 2 weeks later. Successful, full recovery expected. She came to my apartment afterward, and for the first time in weeks, she seemed lighter, present, fully there with me. We made love that night differently than before, something more vulnerable in it, more honest. I felt closer to her than I'd felt to anyone in years. Looking back now, I can see the pattern. I can see it so clearly it makes me sick. But in that moment, I felt like a good person. Like someone who'd built not just a business, but a real life in Vietnam. Like someone who'd integrated so completely that I was supporting a Vietnamese family through a medical crisis. This was proof I wasn't just an expat passing through. This was proof I belonged. The business returns slowed and September not stopped, just reduced. Duck explained it as seasonal fluctuation in the European markets. Some delays with the new Binh Duong facility getting fully operational. Normal growing pains with expansion. The explanations made sense. I'd worked in logistics long enough to know that scaling up always hits rough patches. Cash flow gets tight when you're investing in growth. He showed me the order books, the pending shipments, the projected recovery timeline. Everything documented, everything logical. Lynn started making her loan payments to me in October, small amounts but regular. I told her repeatedly it wasn't necessary, but she insisted. Said it was important to her, important for her to maintain her independence. I respected that even though it felt silly given our relationship. She was working longer hours, seemed stressed again. Her father's recovery was going well, but now her mother was having health issues. Nothing serious, but worrying. Vietnamese families, she explained. The eldest daughter carries so much responsibility. I listened and supported and tried to understand. In November, Duck approached me about another opportunity. The European buyers were expanding their orders but needed faster turnaround times, which meant investing in automated packaging equipment for the Binh Duong facility. The investment would be substantial, but the increased volume would more than justify it. He showed me the buyer commitments, the equipment specifications, the ROI projections. My analytical mind kicked in, automatically running numbers, assessing risk, evaluating the logic. But something felt different this time. A small voice in the back of my head asking questions I didn't want to hear. Why did every opportunity require more capital from me specifically? Why weren't the Vietnamese partners contributing proportionally? Duck explained they'd already leveraged their assets for the initial expansion, that their capital was tied up in the manufacturing side, that my liquid position made me the logical investor for the equipment upgrade. It made sense. But that small voice persisted. I told Duck I needed time to think about it. He said, of course, no pressure, just wanted me to have the opportunity since the buyer timeline was tight. That night, I went through all my documentation, all my contracts, all my records. Everything looked legitimate. The business was real. The operations existed. The returns, while reduced, were still happening. My lawyer had reviewed everything. What was I worried about? I talked to Lynn about it. She was quiet for a long time, then said, "What does your gut tell you, Lars?" I admitted I wasn't sure. That logically everything checked out, but emotionally I felt uneasy. She asked if I'd considered pulling back, maybe not investing more, even if I stayed in the current partnership. I said that felt like distrust, like I was questioning people who'd proven themselves trustworthy for almost a year. She looked at me with something in her eyes I couldn't read and said, "Sometimes trust is how people get hurt." I didn't invest in the equipment, told Duck I was being more conservative with my capital, given the slower returns. He said he understood completely. No problem, they'd find alternative financing. I felt guilty about it, like I was letting the team down. But I also felt a small relief, like I'd protected myself from something I couldn't quite name. The returns stopped completely in December. Duck said temporary cash flow issue. The equipment financing fell through. There were delays with shipments. The European buyers were reorganizing. He was apologetic, assured me it was short-term, showed me emails and documents that explained the situation. Everything still looked professional. Everything still had documentation. But that small voice was getting louder now, asking questions I really didn't want to answer. Lynn became distant again, not cold, just absent, working constantly, dealing with family issues, always tired when we did see each other. I asked several times if we were okay, and she said yes, of course, just stressed. She stopped making loan payments. When I asked about it, she looked embarrassed, said her mother's medical bills were more than expected, she'd pay me back soon. I told her not to worry about it. Money didn't matter. We mattered. But somewhere deep in my chest, a weight was forming. A heaviness that had nothing to do with logic or spreadsheets or documented evidence. A feeling I kept pushing down because acknowledging it meant acknowledging I might have been wrong about everything. About my preparation, my intelligence, my ability to see clearly what others missed. I was still telling myself everything would work out. Still believing that temporary setbacks were just that, temporary. Still convinced that my methodical approach and careful planning would protect me from the kind of disasters that happen to careless expats. I had no idea I was already months into the disaster. That I'd been in it from the beginning. That every decision I thought was smart had actually been the setup for what came next. January came with heat that felt different than the heat I'd arrived to 10 months earlier. Back then, it felt exotic, challenging, something to conquer and adapt to. Now, it just felt oppressive. I'd wake up sweating in my District 2 apartment, the air conditioning struggling against humidity that seeped through every seal, and I'd check my phone immediately. Bank account first, email second, messages third. Looking for the deposits that weren't coming. Looking for the explanations that were getting thinner and less frequent. Duck still responded to my messages, but with increasing delays. The tone shifted from apologetic to slightly defensive. Cash flow issues were more complicated than anticipated. The European buyers were renegotiating terms. There were government regulatory changes affecting export documentation. Every explanation came with attachments, forwarded emails, customs documents, buyer correspondence. Everything still looked legitimate on the surface, but I'd started noticing small inconsistencies, dates that didn't quite align, email addresses that seemed slightly off when I looked closely. Nothing definitive enough to prove fraud, but enough to make that weight in my chest grow heavier. I suggested meeting in person. Duck said he was traveling for business, would be back in 2 weeks. 2 weeks became 3. I went to the warehouse in District 9 unannounced on a Tuesday morning. The facility was still operating, but it felt different. Fewer workers, less activity. The equipment I'd helped finance sat idle in corners. I asked for Duck, or either of his partners. The manager, a younger guy I'd met a few times, looked uncomfortable. Said they weren't there, didn't know when they'd be back, suggested I call them directly. I stood in that warehouse looking at the systems I'd built, the optimization I'd implemented, the infrastructure my capital had helped create, and felt something crack inside my certainty. This was real, wasn't it? This business existed. These operations were actual. But real didn't mean what I thought it meant. Real could still be a shell. Real could still be a performance designed to extract maximum value before collapsing. Lynn stopped responding to my messages entirely in late January, not blocked the messages still delivered, just ignored. I went to her apartment one evening after work, knocked for 10 minutes. A neighbor eventually came out and told me in broken English that she'd moved. Didn't know where, didn't know when she'd left. I stood in that hallway feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. We'd been together for months. We'd been intimate. I'd helped her family, and she just disappeared without a word. I tried calling her, straight to voicemail. Her company wouldn't tell me anything except that she no longer worked there. I contacted mutual friends from our dinners together and got vague responses. She'd relocated for family reasons. She was dealing with personal issues. No, they didn't have a new number for her. The speed of her disappearance, the completeness of it, felt surgical, planned. Not the actions of someone dealing with a family crisis. The actions of someone executing an exit strategy. That's when I started really auditing everything. Not casual review like I'd done before, but forensic analysis. I took every contract, every agreement, every document to a different lawyer, one who specialized in foreign business disputes. Paid him double his normal rate to prioritize my case. Spent 3 days walking him through everything. The timeline, the investments, the returns, the expansion, all of it. He was quiet for a long time after reviewing everything. Then he asked me a question that made my blood go cold. Did you ever verify that your partnership was actually registered with the Department of Planning and Investment? I said, of course, my first lawyer had checked that. He nodded slowly and said, "Can I see that verification?" I couldn't. I'd never actually seen the registration documents myself. I'd trusted that my lawyer had verified it. The lawyer who'd been recommended through an expat forum. The lawyer who now, when I tried to contact him, had a disconnected number and an email that bounced back. The new lawyer did the verification himself. My partnership wasn't registered, not improperly registered, not registered at all. The business Duck and his partners operated was registered, but my equity stake existed only in documents that had no legal standing. I owned nothing, had no claim to anything. The contracts I'd signed were sophisticated enough to look legitimate, but were structured in ways that gave me no actual recourse under Vietnamese law. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me, all my preparation, all my research, all my careful analysis. None of it had protected me, because I'd been analyzing the wrong things. I'd been so focused on understanding Vietnamese business culture, on networking properly, on avoiding the obvious scams, that I'd walked straight into a sophisticated one designed specifically for people like me, for people who thought they were too smart to be fooled. The financial damage was catastrophic when I finally calculated it. The initial partnership investment, the expansion capital, the money for Lynn's father's surgery that I now understood had probably been fiction. Equipment purchases, various business expenses, I'd covered over months. Conservative estimate, about $70,000. More than I'd saved in 3 years working in Rotterdam, more than I'd ever lost to anything in my life. Gone into a system designed to extract it efficiently while keeping me convinced I was building something real. I tried everything to recover it. Filed police reports that went nowhere. The officers were polite but clear. This was a civil business dispute, not criminal fraud. And, as a foreigner with improperly structured contracts, I had minimal legal standing. Hired another lawyer to explore options. He said I could sue, but it would cost thousands more with almost no chance of recovery. The partners would claim I was a consultant paid for services rendered. The lack of proper registration was my responsibility to verify. The money for Lynn was a personal gift with no legal expectation of return. Every angle I'd thought was protected actually exposed me further. Duck finally responded to my messages in late February. Very professional. Very sorry for the business difficulties. The expansion hadn't worked out as projected. My consultant payments had been completed, per our agreement. He wished me well in my future endeavors. The tone was final, dismissive. The tone of someone who knew I had no recourse and was now just a loose end being politely severed. I became obsessed with understanding how I'd missed it. Spent weeks reconstructing every interaction, every decision point, every moment I'd chosen to trust instead of verify. The pattern was so clear in retrospect it made me want to scream. They'd built credibility slowly. Started with legitimate business operations that required minimal investment from me. Just expertise, just consultation. Generated real returns initially to establish trust. Waited until I was invested financially and emotionally before the asks got bigger. Introduced Lynn not as a romantic prospect, but as an intellectual equal, someone who seemed skeptical of expats, someone I had to win over. Made me feel special. Made me feel like I was different from other foreigners. Smarter, more integrated, more worthy of real partnerships. And I'd eaten it up. Every single piece of validation, every moment of feeling superior to other expats. Every instance of thinking my preparation made me immune to their mistakes. All of it had been my ego, creating the exact blind spot they needed to exploit. The smarter I thought I was, the easier I became to manipulate. Because smart people don't think they're being fooled. Smart people trust their analysis. Smart people believe their research protects them. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the humiliation, the absolute crushing embarrassment of becoming exactly the kind of expat I'd judged so harshly. I'd looked at guys in bars complaining about being scammed and thought they were idiots who deserved it for being so obvious. Now, I was that guy. Just with a different story. Just with more sophisticated window dressing. But fundamentally the same, a foreigner who thought he understood Vietnam after less than a year, who mistook temporary welcome for permanent belonging, who confused transaction for relationship. I thought about leaving Vietnam entirely, going back to Rotterdam with my tail between my legs. But I couldn't afford it. I'd burned through too much of my savings. I needed to work, needed to rebuild. And there was something else too, a stubborn refusal to let this defeat me completely. If I left now, the story ended with me as just another failed expat. If I stayed, maybe I could salvage something, not the money, that was gone, but maybe some dignity, some understanding, some actual wisdom instead of just expensive humiliation. I found work at a local software company. Real work, not partnership fantasies. Salary was a fraction of what I'd been making in the Netherlands, but it was honest. I moved to a cheaper apartment in Bintan, then close to where I'd started, sold the motorbike, cut expenses to minimum, stopped going to expat networking events where I'd have to explain what happened, stopped pretending I had anything figured out. The Vietnamese colleagues at my new job were kind in that distinctly Vietnamese way, polite, helpful, but maintaining clear boundaries. They didn't invite me to dinners with their families, didn't introduce me to business opportunities, kept things professional and friendly but unmistakably separate. And I appreciated it now. Understood it wasn't rudeness or exclusion. It was just reality. I was a foreigner. I'd probably always be a foreigner. And that was okay. It didn't make me less welcome. It just made me aware of my actual position instead of my imagined one. I saw Lynn once, months later, in District 1. She was walking with a Vietnamese man, laughing at something he said, looking relaxed and happy in a way she'd never quite looked with me. Our eyes met for half a second. She didn't acknowledge me, just looked away and kept walking. I stood there on the sidewalk feeling that weight in my chest again, but different this time. Not hurt, just sad. Sad that I'd mistaken performance for intimacy. Sad that I'd needed so badly to feel special that I'd ignored every warning sign. Sad that she probably wasn't even a bad person. Just someone doing what she needed to do in an economy where foreign money was opportunity and emotional attachment was a luxury she couldn't afford. I never found out if Duke and his partners had planned it from the beginning or if it evolved opportunistically. Never found out if Lynn was part of the setup from that first dinner or if she'd been brought in later when they realized that was a bigger mark than initially assessed. It didn't really matter. The outcome was the same. I'd invested everything, money, trust, ego, fantasy, into a Vietnam that existed primarily in my imagination. A Vietnam where my preparation mattered, where my intelligence protected me, where I could decode the system and come out ahead. The real Vietnam, the one I live in now, is more complicated, more opaque, less interested in whether I understand it correctly. It operates by rules and relationships I'll probably never fully grasp. And that's not because I'm not smart enough or didn't prepare enough. It's because I'm outside the culture looking in, and no amount of research or analysis changes that fundamental position. I still live here, still work here, but I'm different now, smaller in my expectations, more cautious in my assumptions, less confident that I know anything at all. Other expats sometimes ask my advice about business opportunities, about partnerships, about integration. I tell them the same thing every time: verify everything independently, trust nothing at face value, and understand that feeling special is usually the first sign you're being targeted. Some of them listen, most don't. I can see it in their eyes, that same certainty I had, that same belief that they're different, smarter, more prepared than the expats who came before them. That same conviction that their research, their language skills, their cultural awareness makes them immune to the patterns that trap everyone else. And I know they'll probably learn the same way I did. Not from warnings or advice or other people's stories, but from the experience of having everything they thought they knew revealed as assumption and fantasy and desperate need to feel like they'd won something. I didn't fail in Vietnam because I wasn't prepared. I failed because I was so prepared I couldn't imagine being unprepared. Because my intelligence became arrogance and my confidence became blindness. Because I needed so badly to prove I was different that I ignored the fundamental truth. Everyone who gets taken thinks they're too smart to be taken. Right up until they're not. The heat still hits me when I walk outside. The traffic still swarms around me. The city still pulses with energy and opportunity and danger and beauty, all mixed together in ways I'll never fully parse. But I don't try to conquer it anymore. Don't try to decode it or master it or prove myself against it. I just live in it, work in it, survive in it, one day at a time, without the fantasy of understanding, without the illusion of control. And honestly, that's probably the only way I should have approached it from the beginning. But you can't teach that. You can't prepare for it. You have to lose everything you thought you had before you understand you never had it at all. That's the lesson. That's the one thing I actually learned. Not about Vietnam specifically. About myself. About the distance between who I thought I was and who I actually am when everything gets stripped away. It's an expensive lesson. A humiliating one. But it's real in a way nothing else in my first year here was real. And I guess that's worth something, even if it cost me everything else to learn it.